And what we're here tonight to do is help explain and elaborate on the facts of the turf field. This project is one that has a lot of momentum in town. A lot of really dedicated people have done a lot of work, and there's been some confusion and perhaps some miscommunication lately. So Mike McGovern, the town manager, decided that it might be a good idea to clarify the issues and bring everybody up to date so that everybody's on the same page. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Paul. When I sent out the invitation to this, I called it a gathering. And for those of you that got the original invitation, the heading of it was invitation. And I don't know if any of you heard, but about 3 days later, there was a major virus, a worm going through the internet, and they said that it was labeled beginning invitation. So, the one I sent out, if any of you heard about that, has absolutely nothing to do with that virus or worm. It was a total coincidence. So anyway, those things happen. As Paul mentioned, I thought it'd be good to get everyone together and to give you all an update on where we stand with the turf field. And you know, the good news is, as I think we can all see, it's under construction, and it'll just be just a little bit of time before we're actually seeing the kids enjoy it, which was the original vision. I do want to introduce Andrew Manning. Some of you may not know Andrew. Andrew is with Pinkham and Greer. He's the project engineer, and he is the person who is the detailed person overseeing the construction day to day. Beyond that, I know everyone in the room. And I sense probably most everyone knows everyone else. Is that the case? I'm seeing some hesitation. Why don't we introduce why doesn't everyone briefly introduce themselves so we'll know who's here?
Sure. My name is Paul McKinney, and I'm the chairman of the town council.
I'm Alan Hawkins, superintendent of schools.
David Backer, town council.
Sue Weatherby, director of community services.
Pauline Fortray, business manager.
Keith Weatherby, athletic director.
Sarah Brennan, town council.
Bob Malley, Director of Public Works.
I'm Karen Burke, school board.
Kevin Sweeney, literally and figuratively, a great view of the school board.
Trish Brigham, school board.
That's Leslie Bridges of the car.
Peter Carter, school board.
Leslie Bridgers from the Current.
I'm Jay Evans on the Turf Committee. Doug Courier from the Turf Committee.
Jim Rowe, town council.
John Brady, Turf Committee.
Bob Dahl, Turf Committee.
Continue that, Andy Strout, Turf Committee.
As Mike mentioned, Andrew Manning with Pinkham and Greer.
Michael Ott, volunteer.
Brianna Smith, Turf Committee.
Thank you. This has really been a unique partnership, I think, obviously, of the Citizen Turf Committee, the Town Turf Committee, the school board, the town council, and so many others. And I think it's really amazing. I think when a lot of us first heard about a turf field back at the school building committee, how long ago was that? Three years ago. There was 4 years ago. 4 years ago, there was a little bit of this will never happen. And what eventually happened, it didn't happen at that point in time. It didn't make it into that project, but then eventually some citizens came forward. And I'd like to start, some of you have the PowerPoint handout, most of you, if you don't, there's other copies up here. This is in fine print, very fine print. It just gives you example. I was talking to Graham before the meeting, and how many contributors now?
Close to 680.
About 680 contributors now have given to this effort, and mostly from Cape Elizabeth, although there's some that used to live here, and there's some that for various reasons have different ties to the community. The print got a little bigger. It's just the way PowerPoint works. in a little bit. If you, in the back of the handout, there's some financial information, and you can see if you look at the lights, you look at the turf field, you look at everything else, it's about $817,000 in goods that have been given to the town of Cape Elizabeth, to the school department, but most importantly to the kids of the town. It's really pretty significant. I think it's important that we look at special recognitions of how this happened. I know Michael and others, Michael Ott and others, were first talked to a gentleman named Ray Moulton about lights. And Ray was really the guy, he passed away about a year ago now, but he was really the person who probably let everyone see the potential that someone could happen when he was willing to step forward and to make the really first major gift to the effort. And it was in part because of Ray. My sense is that it gave everyone the confidence that maybe the town could, the town meaning not the government, but the town's people could really step forward and do an awful lot more. And I think it was Ray that provided that inspiration. Secondly, despite all the other things that the National Guard has to do these days, the National Guard stepped forward and they helped install the lighting. Obviously, Hannaford, we're all aware that they provided a very significant major gift, as well as their associates, different people who work for Hannaford who have been instrumental in this. And the school board, I carefully mentioned it's the Coca-Cola bottling company, but the sign's going to read Dasani for those that would prefer water over soft drinks. How did this all happen? Obviously, it begins with the kidsturf committee, and I've seen letterhead for the turf committee, but I've never seen so many members gathered. So it's good to see those members, and they were the ones that really made the phone calls, prepared the mailings, prepared the website, all those other things that inspired folks to give for one reason or another. They also provided an awful lot of advice throughout the project from the very beginning. Most of it welcome. There are some days when there's a little bit of give and take, but all I think really appreciated. At least I've appreciated. There was also the town turf committee, with Wendy Seltzer chaired that, and that was the group that really helped to frame some of the decisions that needed to be made. As a result of some of the issues that came out at the town council meeting, there was an agreement that the school board ought to be the ones that really zero in on how the fields are going to be used, the scheduling, some of those issues. I know the committee that Linda chairs, subcommittee of the school board, has been very involved with that, working with Keith and others, several meetings. That committee decided to farm all that to that era. It also provided some of the guidance as to when the project should begin, how much money needed to be into the kitty before it began. The whole concept of needing funds to replace the field, because the field only has a certain lifespan. And that committee met 4 times, although we can only find minutes of 2 of the meetings, and really provided, I think, significant input that helped the project advance. The planning board had a real significant role in this. There was an application that went to the planning board for the turf field, and the planning board said there needs to be a little more master planning in this. Obviously you're thinking about bleachers, you're thinking about a concession stand, you're thinking about a coach's box. These things ought to be shown on a plan so that you don't make a mistake at the beginning, and as a result, those different things were shown on the plan. We needed a permit from the Maine DEP, and the Maine DEP was originally not going to issue the permit until next week, if we were lucky. And as a result of the citizen committee encouraging the DEP to move a little faster, suddenly I think the permit came within a week from when the call was first made. Obviously, the school board, the council, none of this would have happened without votes at different times and without strong support and a number of different votes to authorize fundraising, to name the field, to authorize the work to begin. The engineers, Northeast Turf, Hugh Inc. is the actual name of the company who's constructing the field as we're here, and also the coaches that are involved, the school staff, the municipal staff, folks like Keith and Andy and, so many others, Bob Malley, who's heavily involved as well on the day-to-day stuff. And, Michael Ott and Graham Smith, I don't think there's a day in the last year that they haven't thought of this turf field, perhaps made phone calls to try to get assistance, keeping track of the funds, keeping track of the whole process, and really digging into every aspect of the field. I think in any large project, for it to get done, there needs to be, one or two individuals who really spearhead it and are willing to make an awful lot of sacrifices to themselves to move something forward. And, in this case, while, they were supported, I know, by a very able committee, they really have been the folks that have made this thing happen, more than anyone else, as well as all the leaders. You note I deliberately didn't put a turf field there that was Cape Elizabeth. You can tell with the setting of that picture that it's in a more urban area than Cape Elizabeth, but that's one I found out someplace. The current status of the project, Andy was over there this afternoon looking at it, meeting with the contractor. The underground drainage system is already in. They've had the very beginnings of putting the stone underlayment as well as the fabric that eventually sits on. And the turf itself might begin going on the end of next week, give or take. Again, it all depends on the weather, but overall the progress is pretty good. As I think everyone knows, we've had two major setbacks in terms of the snow and the rain that we've had, but overall the process seems to be really going well. The contractor is doing a good job, and it's being properly overseen. When will the field be ready for use? We're not giving a set day. Obviously, we need to be sure that the field is accepted by the town before it's used as a field. And that just, we really depend on Andrew and his firm to tell us when it's ready for acceptance. And that involves making sure that, all the specifications have been met, and, that there aren't the puddles, there aren't the things, and the other issues that you sometimes get in any construction project. And it's typical process. You need the acceptance. One of the major issues is the status of permanent lines. And actually, I'm not going to. You can have them all after, but I didn't want to hand them out at the beginning. What I've done is I've put together all of the various emails, as well as a number of other documents that relates to the permanent line issue. So if anyone wants to see how the decision was made, how it evolved, all those different issues, you can really pretty much trace it in emails, because while there are some phone calls involved, most everything business is done today through emails. It was done. I don't know if some of you probably have seen the most recent emails that Michael's prepared. Michael Ott, we can talk about him a little bit later. But there was very extensive research into what lines would be permanent lines, what lines would be painted on the field, and we can talk about all that later when we get into the discussion. The question you can ask, who made the decision to put the permanent lines that became part of the contract? When you look at the emails, it's very clear that I received a recommendation from the kidsturf committee. I accepted the recommendation. I eventually signed the change order to do that, although it's the change orders, no one seemed to know where it was for a while, but it's very clear that it was a town official that did sign off on what the permanent lines would be, and I am the official who did that. There's been some discussion and some feeling that perhaps other sports should be added. The contractor just this afternoon gave us an estimate. And the estimate it isn't an estimate, it's a price. We're really tied into a single contractor at this point. They're the ones doing the field. We can't really bring in another contractor. Whether or not we're happy with the price or not is, I suppose it can be some discussion, but this is the price they've offered as of this afternoon, is for each of the two sports that we might like to consider to have placed on the field, it's $15,000 for each of those sports. And we can look at them later, but Andrew brought some versions of this of this plan here. There's only 6 or 7 of them, but it shows exactly what would needed to be added for field hockey and what would need to be added for girls lacrosse. And there can be a discussion on the advisability of adding each of those. But the possibility remains, and those, you know, we're talking maybe a day more work to do that, a day or two? Yeah, so it's a decision that is still able to be made, and you know, if that's the desire of the community to do it, that's entirely possible. If you do want more permanent lines, you know, there's the cost to consider. There's all the other issues that some of you have seen in the emails of you know, I won't go into them all, but you know, there's all those different factors to consider. There needs to be discussion on who makes the decision. When does the decision need to be made? You know, this would be a good time to make it. It would be a very good time to make it, because although we never did get a price back if they put it in later.
I did.
And how much was that?
Because the way the lines work, it's difficult to give a price right now because it entirely depends on how the lines would be modified, which lines would have to move, which lines stay the same. The range of adding or modifying, I can get into the details later of it if people like, but the estimate is 2 to 3 times that $15,000 figure. So anywhere between $30,000 and $45,000 to do the whole field over again with new lines. That's obviously, if parts of it are moved or parts of it are changed, it's a portion of that.
So it really comes down to, if there is a decision to put in those lines, it really ought to be made early next week, because that's the time frame in order to do it while the contractor's here, before the actual surface is put down. There's been lots of questions of process. How does it all work? Pinkham and Greer handles all of the daily issues. You can see, you know, just from Andrew's, and you'll see it in the emails, they handle the technical, working directly with the contractor, giving instructions to the contractor. I do not interact with the contractor. They are our agent. It's authorized, actually, in writing that they are our agent, and with the exception of change orders, they're able to do that. I'm the person that signs the change orders in the overall project manager. That was part of the council vote when this was approved. The school board sets the policy for all use issues. That's, you know, as I mentioned, Linda's committee's been working on that. As far as scheduling, I know Keith mentioned to me the other day the extent to which he's already aggressively looking at the fall schedule, and it appears every sport will be able to have every home game.
Every varsity game, every fall sport will be on it.
Yeah, so pretty significant. Every varsity sport in every fall sport, home game will be on that field. Pretty significant. You know, so Keith does we've always had this little fields committee that works out the scheduling. It consists of the athletic director, the community services director, and the director of public works, because they have to look at resting of fields and maintenance of fields, community use, school use, and that's generally how those are all decided. The town council makes all the funding decisions, sets the project parameters, does all of the overall direction and agreement as to what different town properties can be used for, including the school grounds. The volunteers provide significant helpful input. You know, even during the construction phase, there were lots of discussions that happened as this project evolved, including such things as soccer nets, including such things as the goalposts for football, including the coordination of the scoreboard with Hannaford and Coca-Cola Bottling Company. There's all these different issues, so it's really important, you know, that it be a coordinated, seamless effort. And as a result, Michael Ott, I think we've had one construction meeting so far since construction began. He participated in that meeting, and you know, it's really important that we have that input and we have that assistance so that everyone knows what has been said over the years and that everyone knows how it moves forward. The superintendent also oversees the school-related issues, and I know the council's aware I'm out of town from May 9th to the 18th, which could be a very key time in this field, and there could be decisions to be made, and Alan has agreed very enthusiastically sort of, to take over the responsibility that I have relating to the field during the time that I'm gone. There's also some issues of, what's the process for possible future phases. There was discussion of bleachers, and for I think everyone's aware, I had proposed some money in a municipal bond issue for bleachers. That was turned down it was not set for public hearing by the town council when they met last Wednesday night to accept the recommendation of the finance committee. It sounds like awful involved, but anyway, that was not there. But there's still the possibility that the bleachers could be funded privately, or perhaps by some governmental purpose, but not this year and not out of that bond issue. Some councils listen very carefully to what I say. There's still that possibility. And there's folks in this room that are actively working on a concession stand or a snack shack or whatever you want to call it. There's the possibility of coach's box and other, I don't know what other is, but you never know with other. It's my suggestion that in order to avoid some of the uncomfortableness that we've had on a number of issues, that on all of those things, that the school board first give the blessing to whatever it is, in the how many bleacher seats, where they're going, what the coach's box looks like, what the concession stand looks like, that the school board first give their okay to it, and once they give their okay, then it comes to the town council, and the town council says that it's okay. We also, I think, the other thing I wanted to mention, and it doesn't apply to everyone here, but we have a number of other projects that I want to make sure that we don't get started in them and have folks feel as though that maybe something hadn't been communicated along the way. So I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes talking about that. First of all, I received a day or two ago the plans for the dugouts for Capano Field and for Holman Field. Capano Field is the girls' softball field. Holman Field is the major baseball field. There's been discussion of putting dugouts there for probably, how long, Keith?
Long time.
A long time. Yeah, it was permitted back, I know Jim Rowe was involved in it back then, in the year 2000, I believe, and it was a very ambitious plan, and this is a far less ambitious plan, and there's a group of citizens who want to do that. I know the town council has approved, the application, that there be an application with the fundraising, and if anyone wants to look at those plans, they're there for anyone to look at. But those are coming up, and just, a day I had land on my desk an application for the DEP permit to move that forward, and, the citizens who want to raise that money want to move forward, and if there is concern that folks don't want that to move ahead, I need to know it before I sign that permit and move that forward. So the plan's there anyway. The traffic light at the high school entrance, that is a requirement that the planning board set when the high school renovation project was approved and, all the different work there, the new parking lots. That is currently getting its final design. There's some little road work involved in it as well as the lights. I expect the town council will be seeing the plans in June for that. I know it's being actively worked on. In fact, I thought some traffic counters out there were MDOT, but I think they were actually relating to that particular project I heard yesterday. But that's coming. Town center sidewalks, it's school safety sometimes an issue. That's also part of the bond issue that the council is approving. And I think for the schools, the major things that it includes from the high school driveway down to Fowler Road, which will not only sidewalks but drainage. The bond issue is going to have a public hearing on Monday evening. I think the school board's aware of most everything in there. Once the bond issue is approved, the school board is welcome, as well as the town, to begin to spend the money for those projects as long as Pauline handles the cash flow appropriately, which I'm sure she will. But we don't actually plan to borrow the money until next year. But the work will begin, and all, there's classroom furniture in there, and some windows and a lot of security things. And once that is approved, all of that will be ready ready to move forward. So now I'd like to actually to move to questions, comments. You know, what are your thoughts on how we ought to proceed? What are your thoughts on what could have been done better? You know, everything's fair game. Do you want me to hand out the thing with the emails now, or would you rather wait to the end? Wait to the end? Okay. Anyone want to ask any questions about any aspect of the project? Michael and Graham are here in the front row. Andrew's here. Superintendent. Kevin.
I've got a process question, actually. Does the committee that was set up and approved by the town council, the joint committee of the school board and town council still exists?
It still exists on paper. I had written to Wendy Seltzer, the committee chair. I think it's in some of those emails, about 4 months ago, and indicated that around the time of construction that there'd be one last meeting, but it would be more celebratory than you know, functional decisions. The practice with the community has always been that once we get to the construction phase, that it's usually turned over to the staff to move projects forward. It's just real difficult with, you know, trying to, you know, with all the different decisions that you need to do to advance projects, to have a committee in place. But it still does exist on paper. It could meet if you know, that's the desire.
No, it's a question of whether or not it exists, because I was never informed that it was shut down, and I am a member of that committee.
Right. It has not been shut down. It's still there, and the intent was to have one last meeting of it to sort of, you know, overview the whole thing and to, you know, have a discussion on whatever the committee wants to discuss. Do you want me to, Kathy? Madam Chairman, you want the mic?
No, thank you. What is the cost to paint the lines for the girls' sports? You've given us the cost for permit. What is the cost to paint them?
Yeah. Robert, you want to come up?
Yeah, you're going to bring a mic here. Essentially, just rough estimates, somewhere between $300 and $500 to paint field hockey, and probably just a little bit less than the lower end of that for girls and boys. Paint is much more expensive than the traditional paint we have been using, and there's two different types of paint. There's a removable paint, and there's one that isn't, but essentially it's about in that range to do the paint. And we paint once a year, but they can't be touched up.
So the cost is once a year, 3 to 5, and then 3 to 4?
Yes.
Yeah. Just on the turf field, and we're still painting all the other fields throughout the season.
Right.
Yeah, that's just on the turf field.
And you mentioned somebody recommended doing it as is, where you've got some permanent lines and some painted lines. And could you tell us about those recommendations and who made them and why they thought that was?
The recommendation back in February?
Yes.
Do I want to do that, or does someone else want to do that?
I'll take it.
Okay.
First of all, what I'd like to do is acknowledge the work of Bill Homa, who cannot be here tonight. He is in Arizona, and he did an enormous amount of work on this. He literally reviewed about 150 different fields. And then, after reviewing 150 different fields, Jesse, by the way, there was some very nice words said about Ray earlier. I'm sorry you missed it. We can probably go back to that slide, can we, later?
We can.
Okay. So, literally, he looked at about 150 different field designs. Very exhaustive. He also, beyond that, spoke individually to 11 different schools whose designs he thought made sense. And he asked them a very simple question. He said, if you had to do it over again with your permanent lines, what would you do differently? So in other words, could we learn from their mistakes? And what I'd love to do is backtrack for a moment. When Graham and I first started this process and we started interviewing potential vendors, one of the very first things out of our mouths was, we want 5 lines, 5 sets of lines on this field. And to a vendor, they all strongly recommended that we not do that. The vendor we've chosen has put in about 200 fields. They again recommended that we not do that for two primary reasons. One is what they call line creep. If you get too many sets of lines on at one time, permanent lines, it becomes far too confusing for the players. The other one is you're stitching and gluing that many different lines. The chances of those lines tearing are greatly enhanced or more significant than they otherwise would be. Just like any stitching you have on your clothing. When we looked at all these fields, when Bill looked at all these fields, the bulk of them had two, sometimes three sets of lines. And what we decided to do was we wanted to try and put as many lines down as possible to the recommendation of, but with the recommendation of, from our vendor was, let's not put any more down than three. So Bill went through, I'd say, 12 different versions of this field layout. And what we ultimately ended up coming up with is an integrated design. We used as many of these three sports that were chosen, boys lacrosse, football, and soccer. Those lines overlapped as much as could be possible. And then a lot of times, the actual colors of the lines, it sounds confusing, but they're actually shared. As an example, a football field, the 30-yard lines and the 50 are not white like the football field is. They're actually gold. When you go to some of these fields that have been laid out and you try and play a game like lacrosse on them, it's very hard to tell where you're supposed to be. With this layout that Bill has come up with, that won't be an issue. Lacrosse Magazine picked this up and supposedly wrote an article about it. They thought it was very innovative. Let's see where else we are. The other thing is, a little history here. When we started this process, we were aware of one type of turf called slit film. That's been around for about 10 years. As we came into this process and started to do more work, we realized there's a new generation of turf out there called monofilament. In tests in laboratories, they believe it could last as maybe 50% longer than the existing turf that's out there right now. So we met as a big group, everybody at the high school, Alan, Keith, school representatives, and we decided on that day that we were going to go for this monofilament product because we thought it would be in the best long-term interest of the community. We get more use out of it. But the problem was at the time, we didn't have enough money. We could pay for the field all green, but we didn't have enough money to pay for the lines. We continued to fundraise, we continued to work on it, and we were able to raise enough money to pay for some lines. Now, if we had gone for an all-green field, it would have put an enormous burden on Public Works. Painting 5 sets of lines, especially for sports like lacrosse and football and soccer, which are very, very hard on grass fields. Very hard. I would imagine in lacrosse, I'm guessing, you may have to paint those things every week or every 10 days with this paint. So the thought was, let's put the lines down for the sports that tear up grass fields the most. Let's take that burden off of Public Works. Let's design it so that Public Works has to paint 1 set of lines per season. In this case, we have girls lacrosse and girls field hockey. Now, if you go and visit some fields, and I'd encourage you to do that, go to NYA, go to Fitzpatrick, go to Scarborough. You'll see these painted lines. They look fantastic. Not an issue. The other thing we learned is Bill talked to the Lacrosse Federation. It's detailed on here somewhere. I can't remember exactly what it's called. They wouldn't say it directly, but we got the sense that the girls' lacrosse lines are going to change again. You know, if you know the history, they've changed frequently over time.
Just interject that girls lacrosse lines were just changed 2 years ago. There never used to be a boundary around the girls lacrosse field. That was changed. The second year there's been a boundary in girls lacrosse. And as Mike mentioned, there's a good chance that the girls lacrosse lines could change again when the National Federation takes over control of high school girls lacrosse.
Thank you. So what we wanted to do was limit the financial burden, the time commitment on Public Works. Also, if we had put this field down all green and these lines were painted, we had off-season lines that are still on the field from the season before, we have no idea what that field was going to look like. It's a total question mark. And it could have looked good and it could have looked lousy. This way we take some of that uncertainty out of the equation. And I'd encourage you to, and I've probably missed a couple things, but I'd encourage you to read this, email, it's in Michael's package. And again, I just want to reiterate that people, every field that we looked at, all 150 of them that Bill looked at, they all paint lines. Every single one of them.
As shown in the sketch over here, but I have copies also, the There's two to a package there. Currently, football is white, except for that the 50-yard line and the 30-yard line in the goal line, which all line up with another sport, are gold. So the majority of the football field is white. The numbers, the arrows, the hash marks, and the majority of the 5 and 10-yard lines are white. The sidelines are white. It's only a few lines that overlap with the men's lacrosse that are a varying color. Beyond that, the majority of the lacrosse, or I should say all of the lacrosse lines, are gold. So that includes the end line, the side lines, the attack zone lines, and the goal crease for lacrosse.
The sheets that they're looking at include
The top sheet,
including field hockey, girls lacrosse.
what was handed out is two sheets. One showing currently, sorry, there are different sheets. Sorry, there's actually two sheets in the packet. Sorry about that, Mike. There's two sheets to a packet. Nope. Yes, that's correct. That's one set. That's correct. And they're difficult to see as you line them up. You have to look at them a little bit.
I just. I guess I'm just curious, does football have to be white? Is that a rule? Because, this is what the field's gonna look like. If you're gonna walk up and go, oh, there's a football field here, okay? So, is there any flexibility? Could we make some girls line white?
Right now, technically, no. I have to answer that because the fabric has been delivered to the site with the lines already in them. And I can get into the technical details of those lines, but the decision made in February is on site right now.
What was Sarah's question?
Does football have to be white?
Excuse me, could I ask a question? I see all these lines on the two sets, but when back up just a moment, on one that's already been delivered down to the field, what lines are on what's been delivered?
The question is, what lines are on the field that has been delivered down to the construction site? And that goes back to the February decision. It was needed to be made in February in order to manufacture the material. The football, lacrosse, and soccer lines are manufactured into the product right now.
So they're already on.
They are already on site. They are tufted. They're part of the manufacturing process, so they are permanently in the fabric.
So football is white on these
Correct.
two diagrams, lacrosse is gold,
Correct.
and what's
Soccer is maroon.
So one of these that we have is already like, it was delivered.
That is correct.
The second one shows the.
What would it look like if the two additional sports are inlaid into the field? And I can discuss the inlaying process and why it's.
And Keith was involved there, but there was a lot of input from the coaches, football, soccer, lacrosse coaches on what colors to choose. They approved the color choices for each of those sports. I think that's important to note.
One real issue with girls lacrosse, and I'm not an expert, but if you look at the creases, it's actually in the girls lacrosse, there's a greater distance that they run. The creases are actually further back than they are in boys lacrosse. And, that's why we're really nervous about girls lacrosse in permanent lines, because there's the sense that perhaps those creases might be the same in just a few years. We don't know that for sure, but that's a real point that we're nervous about.
I did start working with the committee earlier just to help get this started. Just a couple of questions, comments as I'm listening, because I haven't been close to this at all, and maybe it takes somebody coming in with a little different view of this. On the issue of the lines, from what I understand, the field is here, right? The lines are on it. They are the colors that they are right now. Changing those would incur additional costs, obviously, which none of us want to take on at this point. Maybe it's something that we put it down, we use it for a year. If there are issues that it's ineffective, can we paint over these? We look at that point in time to put more funds into paint over these lines. But it just seems like we're dwelling on something now that is already set. It's been paid for. Making changes to really isn't an option. And unless I'm missing a point, please help me about.
I think it is an option, Scott, to do field hockey.
Adding lines, correct.
And the process of the option is just my personal opinion. It would not be good to do it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just saying the color of the existing ones what I was commenting on. As far as adding, it sounds like painting is the option right now. Is really the only option.
Just an economic question just to ask. If it's about $500 to paint a set of lines, and the field's good for 12 years, that's about $6,000. Would we not be smart to, where everything is already delivered, to just understand that that's what we're going to have to do is paint those lines permanently, instead of spending $15,000, $30,000, or $45,000 to have this from an economic point of view. We're already at $800,000, so we could go to $900,000.
I'll take that as a statement rather than a question.
Okay.
I think in supporting some of the discussion about the additional fields, there's a couple of things that we've obviously researched and looked into. Our research shows that field hockey has changed twice in the last 6 years as far as official rules go. Lacrosse, as was mentioned, women's lacrosse, as was mentioned earlier, was changed 2 years ago to include a hard boundary. What that means for those who don't play lacrosse, the field used to be open-ended. It was the official's responsibility to stop play when play was no longer competitive, bring the players back into the field of play, and resume play. That was standard back then. It is now a hard boundary. That boundary of field hockey, the boundary on the sidelines of field hockey, on the sidelines of men's lacrosse, and the sidelines of women's lacrosse are the same line. Now, the one thing about women's lacrosse that makes a lot of people nervous, myself included, my wife is a lacrosse coach, so I kind of get these things every once in a while, is that the field isn't permanent in its size right now. There are very many flexible variables in women's lacrosse fields that town by town, as you paint the field, you make it fit to what you have. So the goals aren't so many yards apart. They can vary between 90 and 100 yards apart. The field can be 60 or 70 yards apart. Well, everybody makes them 60 yards because that's what all the other fields are, so they use the same lines. The fear is, as women's lacrosse becomes more competitive and it gets into the mainstream more than it is right now, they're going to start formalizing these field dimensions. And why I bring that up is, with the installation of permanent lines, the reason why I bring up the cost as being a significant concern is you can put them in now and make that decision. And that's your choice. I have no problems with that. We would do that. The question is, it costs so much right now. And there's a difference, as Mike mentioned earlier, the timing is very important. Because the way the field is installed, the way the field is designed. If they're put in now, down the road in the future, if something were to change in that permanent layout, you actually have to remove it. And it's not as simple as going in and saying, well, just pull it up and put it in somewhere else. Instead of just doing a quick swap out, it's actually a 3 or 4 step process. So it's not just the equivalent cost over again. You have to rip out the old lines, patch that field back to green, go in, rip out the green that you have there to put in the permanent lines again for a new location. So there's a lot of risk involved in going ahead with something that may or may not change. And I understand it's a very difficult call. Again, we work for the town in implementing the contract. So my ultimate responsibility is I'm going to take the decision of Mike and run it through the contract. So I have no input as to what the decision of the community is. I can only give you the facts that would help make that decision.
Karen?
Who would be able to answer them best, but is women's soccer line the same as men's soccer line?
Yes,
Okay. And so are all the sports that are being played on this turf field, lacrosse, football, soccer, field hockey, that's it?
Yes.
Okay, I was just, right. And then I guess my only concern when I've seen all these lines, and I think several of other people have asked it, is just, there are a lot of lines there. I just hope it doesn't confuse the athletes.
And that's where the reason that you don't put them in permanently, or it's not
Recommended that you put them in permanently is for exactly that reason. That's the primary one, is there's line confusion, line creep. People don't see what's going on. Painting them, you paint them at the beginning of the season. It is a special paint that you put down on these fields, and what it does is, and I have an example of the material if you want to see what it feels like and what it means, but the paint adheres to the fibers, and it's more permanent than the paint they put on grass. And what it's intended to do is last the entire season, sports season, so that what happens is that paint breaks up, just like the paint on walls crack over time. Well, this paint is formulated to break up as the fibers get played on, people run on the lines. They may need touch-up, actually, during the season to brighten up a certain area, the goal crease, which is always a heavily used area in any sport. And so those areas may need a second or third coat during the season, but the sidelines or any of the guidelines that are shown on the field will break up as they're played on over time, so that at the beginning of the next season, those lines from the last season are pretty much non-existent. They're broken up, the paint is gone, you add the next sport, field hockey or girls lacrosse, and then over that season it breaks up so that you don't get that line confusion of permanent lines always being there.
Relative to the same question, if I'm understanding you correctly, let's say football begins on September 1st and it ends on December 1st. Sometime after those December 1st, if those lines are painted, they won't be there. Is that what I'm understanding?
Correct. If they were painted. If they
If they weren't permanent and you painted them, would they break up so that the next set of lines being painted, you wouldn't have this line?
Not all of the lines, no. Because what happens is it's typically the narrower sports lines that receive a lot of wear and tear. The large 30, the large 40, you're not going to be able to get those to break up, because what's breaking them up is cleats in action on the fibers, breaking the paint into chips, which it falls off over time.
And there's no way to remove that paint?
On top of the cost of putting it down, it's anecdotal evidence, not anecdotal story.
Just one quick comment on it. We looked at that when we were contemplating the all-green field. We looked at that process of removing that paint each and every season. And it takes an enormous crew to do that. It's very time intensive. It's very expensive. And most importantly, for our purposes, it's very hard on the turf itself. They do it down at Gillette, but they've got 20 people and they've got millions of dollars. And they got a huge grounds crew to do it. We don't have that. That's why we decided to go with the permanent lines, because we didn't want to be scrubbing it off and then damaging the turf. A lot of the fiber has a potential of coming up in that instance. That's why we decided not to do it. At a very high cost.
Because the reason why Gillette does it, and very quick story that might explain it, on the NFL level, they also play MLS soccer games there. And they have very specific rules that you can't have overlapping lines. So when they play a football game and they have a soccer game the next week, they can't have any of the football lines there. they have multiple pieces of equipment, and they spend the entire week removing those lines and putting in the soccer lines, and they do it all over again. So they have a crew full-time just doing that.
And then perfectly reasonable. Ask the question.
Yep.
This is not my question, though.
Oh, that's okay.
It's actually a process question. The bleachers, why wouldn't you want to keep the turf field? I mean, the town council and the school board had to vote on the lights, which was $100,000. We voted on the turf, which was about $650 originally when we first voted. The bleachers, if the estimate at this point is $150,000, to me, from a materiality standpoint, that's up in that same range. Why wouldn't you want to, I guess a couple of questions, and this might just be ignorance on my part. Why wouldn't at some point the town council and school board have to vote on that? Particularly if there's more fundraising which needs to be done, which it is. And or why wouldn't you want to keep the turf committee up and running? You've got citizens, school board, town council people to finish the project that way and keep that, from a process perspective, keep all of that information flowing.
You're talking about the town turf committee.
Yes.
Yeah.
To me, it's sort of like the lights originally were standalone, now they're combined with the turf field, which is great. The bleachers to me is just is an additional part of that, but there's a lot of iterations I've heard. There's a lot of money.
You know, if it's the desire of the elected officials to continue to have that committee, there's no reason we couldn't continue to have that committee. I think it would need to be reformulated some because of the individuals on that committee who are representing the school board and the town council. I think there's only one out of the four who are still in office. But if, you know, there's a desire to keep that committee and to be involved in the different issues, that's fine. With the bleachers, you know, there was a lot of discussion as to what they were going to look like and how many seats there were. And the plan, although I'm not sure how much it was discussed last week, was that, you know, I had actually moved away from the suggestion of a match because, you know, the fundraising's been tremendously successful, but I think there's a little bit of donor fatigue at this point. I had moved over to the position that the bond issue ought to contribute $150,000, and then it was really, you know, my thought was to have the school board, you know, working with Keith and the superintendent, recommend exactly what you wanted for bleachers, you know, with even the possibility that some of them might go on another field as well. But, you know, but that's no longer feasible. But, you know, if you want a continuing committee to look at, you know, the issues involving this field or any other field, that's really up to the elected officials.
I'd like to expand on that because I heard a lot of the stuff about the bleachers. When we went to the school board and town council last year, we had this phase 2, which was our reach goal, if you want to call it, to complete the whole stadium concept with bleachers and a snack shack. And we didn't seek approval from the school board. We didn't seek approval from the town council. When we went to the planning board after both bodies had approved the project, the town planning board asked us to get approval for the whole project. At that point in time, we knew as a committee we needed to loop back. So the committee has worked on that. I met with a bleacher vendor this week to get another preliminary plan. Michael's number was based on estimates we had got, but these are not even close to be approved plans. And, you know, I got a little bit taken back when there was a lot of discussion regarding these. Yes, they're going to be nice, but if people follow the trail of how the committee went through with these projects, then they should have known no decisions were being made on these projects at all yet. Now, you know, we've got 3 vendors involved, like we did with the field. We were starting our process to loop back through the organizations, but you got to allow us to loop back through the organizations.
Great. There's a lot going on with the concession stand. And could I put you on the spot, Jim? Could you give us an update on what's going on with the concession stand?
My name is Jim McCrum, for anybody that doesn't know. I've called Mike Ott and Michael McGovern to ask just what direction we should take for the concession stand. probably a month and a half ago, I think Keith Weatherby and I went to Gorham and reviewed their expanded concession stand and talked with them about, how much income they have coming in from that, what sports, how booster clubs are run. We have met with, we have an architect by the name of Ben Walter who has offered his time to design the building. John Mitchell has agreed to take it through the town. We've been, as a couple, 2-3 days ago, I was out at Black Point Inn. They've donated some equipment for us to make it a great concession stand. So, I've talked with Michael, and basically, right now, I need some direction on who's going to tell me what to do, I think, is where I'm at. I do have a meeting scheduled with Alan Hawkins next Monday at 7:30 in the morning to try to find out what direction we want to go. It is a facility that I think, we talk of concession stand, this needs to be a little bigger than what people think a concession stand is, bigger than the one that burned down up near our upper soccer field. I think the fellow, and I can't remember his name in Gorham, Jerry Durgan said, if you want to have your town council and school board receive some phone calls, just have porta potties down. And he said your phone will ring off the hook when you get 2,000 people at a football game. So we've spent quite a bit of time looking at designs for restrooms. Certainly the school will probably have to be open. But this building will probably contain, on the plan that Graham mentioned, we had a 30 by 40 building designed and approved just for its location. Whether that has to be 30 by 60, we don't really know. We're looking at storage for equipment that comes off the field, storage for the athletic departments, bathrooms, and a concession stand. So there's been you cut me off?
I'm moving that direction.
There's been a lot of background work, but really what we need is who's going to make the call. This is the council, the school board, town manager.
And back on the slide, my recommendation was that he work through Alan and present a plan that the school board says we like this, and then it would go to the council for concurrence. That's my recommendation.
I was just going to add, definitely, if you start saying all those things, I think we've got to get the process in place so that we don't end up here and we can be proactive in the future if the communication really flows well. So we can move forward, whether that's the proposal Mike has or the proposal of reinstate, if you will, the town, the turf committee, whatever is the best procedure, but we definitely need to have a process that works.
Would the elected officials mind if the two chairs got together and discussed the issue and provided recommendations back to the two boards as to what the process should be? Does that sound like a reasonable way to do it? Sarah?
I feel like there should be citizens' input. I mean, I've had a lot of people come up to me and say, this turf is great, we love it, we don't want a stadium with coaches' boxes and food concessions and wrappers all over and bleachers. I mean, there's a lot of good ones out there. Maybe it's not the calls, some people raise the money, in the end, that's money talks, but I'm just saying, is there a venue? Yeah, is there a venue for the people in town to say, we love this, but we don't really want the whole shooting match?
Under my
Stadium with concessions and what's the problem with that?
Well, I mean, I don't want to have my opinion, I'm just saying,
Why not? What's wrong?
Say, well, Cave isn't really like a stadium kind of town, and we don't want this to be such a football thing. We thought the turf was going to be, for all sports. And then, as terms of concession, wrappers everywhere, and there's jobs of obesity and those issues, and, I mean, it depends sort of who comes up to you, who talks to you, but it's not everyone in town is totally on board with this.
Yeah, Sarah, under my suggestion, the board would review that issue, and I would assume, but assuming is assuming, that the board would have some level of public participation as it moves toward a decision on that issue. Kathy was next.
Thank you. Now I have this. A couple things, Mike. First of all, I assume that the recommendations also included your staff with reference to the field. I'm thinking of Keith and or others that you solicited information. I mean, I know Keith's not, but I mean, I would want to know that our staff supports the field as is with the lines, whether you're painting them or not, because I'm not sure I understood the painted versus permanent. All permanent was confusing to the players, but painted and permanent is not. I guess I didn't understand that. But given the lines, presuming there has been communication issues in the past, what I'd like to make sure is going forward that we have a plan where there are no longer communication problems, that it's flowing the way it should, and that all parties involved, whether they're decision makers or not, are involved so that they know what's happening, know the real facts versus the innuendos and the rumors and so forth. Because I know as part of the school board, I got a lot of rumors and innuendos and didn't really know what the facts were. So when people come to me, as I think they do with other school board members, and say XYZ, we didn't have the information to be able to answer those questions. So I just want to make sure that going forward, we have a real clear communication line so that everybody who should be involved is involved. And, you know, presumably, as to the extent that we can, we keep those communication lines pretty clear and open.
I agree with you, and it's just I'm trying to find a way to bring people together to then decide what the process is. We're struggling a little with that, Marion.
My suggestion would be there was a committee that was created. It perhaps became dysfunctional because 3 of the 4 elected officials didn't run it, and so it just sort of died. My suggestion is rather than create a new committee, get that committee moving again, get the 3 vacancies of the elected officials filled, and that committee had representatives from kidsturf, from the school board, and the council, and it ought to be able to work just the way the high school building committee worked and stayed as a committee all through the job until it was done. Just the way the pool committee, which I served on years ago, stayed in process, and you had meetings every month, and you stayed in place until the job was done. And I think we're here tonight because that committee was created, and then for whatever reason, it wasn't utilized. And then things got ahead of everyone. And if you have that kind of committee, we don't need to recreate it. It was already created. Let's just fill the vacancies.
I'm seeing a lot of head nodding in agreement
And I'll show you.
on both elected boards. Okay. Who is next?
Mary Ann being telepathic knew what I was going to say. That's exactly what I was going to say. We already got a committee designed to do exactly all of this. Let's just make use of it with regard to the lines of communication that Kathy is concerned about. Again, if you go back and look at our charge that created that citizens committee, it was designed to create that communications path as well.
So what happened with the committee? What happened with the committee?
It made most of its, Bob, it made most of its key decisions. And then, you know, as been mentioned, you know, the only decision, you know, Kevin was there. For example, Kevin, as a member of that committee, designed the financing plan for how the field might be replaced. Actually, they did a lot of really good work. And, you know, I think, I'm trying to remember, were they involved still in the decision when the decision was made to go to the other type of material in the field? No. I think that's where, you know, things just started moving real quick, and, you know, in retrospect.
My sole problem was the fact that the turf committee just puffed. I mean, that's why there's no communication going on. That's why the school board doesn't know what's going on. That's why the town council doesn't know what's going on. We're relying on things to fill the vacuums. And I agree. I mean, I went back and looked at the charge of the original committee, and we should still be operating.
Kevin, I hear you, but, you know, I think when you look at the emails, when you look at all the decisions, To say there's no communication, I don't think is quite accurate. The only decision that I can track down where there wasn't board involvement was the permanent, was the marking of the lines. If you could tell me anything else, there's always rumors out there and stories and anything in Cape Elizabeth. But I think that the reality is, and particularly when you look at all this material, if you look at the council vote, it has about 12 different parts to set this up, which shows, that it was real clear exactly what there was going to be voting on. Those emails were shared with different parties. The communication was there, but I agree there was a major breakdown on the issue of what lines were to be permanent. But I don't think, as I look at the rest of the process, I think one of the problems with this, and it isn't a problem, there was so much citizen involvement, so much participation that sometimes, I think I failed in the coordination of that in circling it back to the boards. There's no question I did. But I think for the most part there's been real communication, and the school board goes off, and this isn't criticism, but they go off. They have a subcommittee meeting looking at the particulars of field operation. They've invited Bob to a number of those meetings, and there's been tremendous communication at that level. Not all those details have percolated back up to the town council, but to what degree do they need to? It's the school department's, the extracurricular committee's responsibility, working with the board, to resolve a lot of those operating type issues. To me, the process, for the most part, has worked well with that one major exception.
With respect, I have to disagree. The process broke down in Master line. And since that time, the board, unless someone who's not passing down information to the board, has been unaware of things like lines and the extent of the bleachers and the price tag associated with them and things like that. The only reason I found out about bleachers was someone happened to forward Michael's email to me, and then Alan was kind enough to forward Michael's email to him about it, talking in terms of school board support. And my instant reaction was, what support? So my sense is if had we kept that committee going, reappointed people who were not reelected, that the communications from that committee would have gone back to the respective elected officials. And that's what my concern was, is I'm an elected official, and I have people approaching me, and I say, I don't know, what are you talking about permanent lines? So I don't know where the communication broke down on, but I know it didn't filter down to me, and from what I can tell from conversations with the rest of the board, it didn't filter down to them.
Kevin, I hate to bring this up, but I think if you look in February, there were some positions that weren't fully available to assist with communication. The school board did not have a superintendent who he was necessarily out on medical leave. We love Alan. He does a terrific job. He communicates very, very well. But, they're apt under those circumstances to be less than perfect. And I take the responsibility for it. But, we still have telephones, we still have email, and, the one thing is, I've been finding the last few days, I send so many emails out on this topic because, there's decisions being made every single moment. And, like, for example, I called the other day Andrew to get a price on these new fields. Even though I didn't know answers, I immediately CC'd Michael and Graham and Alan and a few other spots so they'd know I was asking for the price. That raises a lot of issues. What is he up to? What is he? But that's the reality. We live in instant communication, and sometimes it doesn't work.
I'd like to see the process fixed.
I would too. Yeah, and that's, if you notice with the PowerPoint that he did, I'm trying to accentuate the positive. We're about to have a terrific facility that's about $800,000 worth of citizens' sweat equity and money and everything else that's contributed to. And I just, I'll never play on that field, but I just think it's, you never know. Yeah, it's going to be a real great resource. Process needs to be fixed, but I really want to positive on the great field the community's kids are about to enjoy, and the reunion folks and the rest of them. For the failings that I've had in this project, I freely own up to them. But in the end, I think we're going to have a great project. Other comments or questions? Paul.
I'd just like to summarize a couple of things here after listening to everybody. First of all, thank you for everybody who showed up tonight. This is really important, and it's good that we have open communication and we get the story straight, so to speak. There was a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication involved in this process. However, I think, Michael, you have done a wonderful job in clarifying the issues and explaining the issues and bringing the appropriate experts in to answer the questions. It seems to me that we've come to a few conclusions this evening. One is Mary Ann's suggestion that we should re-energize the committee between the school board and the council, and I'm not sure who comprised that committee exactly, but that's one idea. Okay, and Alan, thank you. That's number one. Secondly, we have lines for 4 permanent sports. That's my understanding. Well, girls soccer is the same as boys. So we have 4 permanent sport lines. We have 2 lines that are going to be painted because in those 2 cases, girls field hockey and girls lacrosse, there's some uncertainty with respect to the rules. It seems like a practical approach given the fact that you don't know what the future is going to hold. And you feel good about those other 4 sports that's not going to change. And finally, I think we have, as we've discussed, we have a process here that people would be more comfortable with in the future. I don't really think you failed, Michael, in any respect. I think there were a lot of circumstances that occurred, and this process moved very quickly. The Turf Committee did a wonderful job. You raised a ton of money. You got support for from nearly 700 households in Cape Elizabeth. Very impressive. And we have a great field. Anybody who hasn't had the opportunity to go down there should go down there and look at that. It's very, very impressive. And maybe someday we'll be able to put some bleachers in there that everybody agrees to. And, that can work out so we'll have a place to sit. But short of that, I think you guys have all done a great job, and we should feel really good about this as a community, that we have a turf field that all these kids can play sports on. It makes me want to be a kid again and go join one of these teams. And I think that says a lot for the community, and we should all feel very proud to be part of this community, and good that we have such wonderful citizens that are willing to put their time and effort into something like this. And we have the email packets on your way out. Feel free if you want a packet to pick it up. We all set, Michael? All right. Thanks for coming.